So we'll begin today with a butterfly, which is just joining the soles of the feet together. And oftentimes we're doing this for the spine, which would look more like that. Sometimes that's called a long-legged butterfly. But today we're bringing those heels in nice and close, and we drop the knees down, and we can come forward with a straight or rounded back. Really is up to you. We'll remind you we're going to be here for 5 minutes though, so if you're engaging or pulling, just keep that in mind. You might get tired after a couple of minutes. It's not uncommon. So feel free to use support under your forearms. You could have blocks under your forehead. You could have something. I wouldn't recommend today anything under your knees unless this is like super intense for you, because we actually want gravity to be pulling our knees down, okay? So if we put a bunch of blocks and pillows and stuff under our knees, we will lose the stretch in the adductors or groin, and this first set is focusing on that. Okay, so we'll come up and we'll just make one small change and then continue. So legs are wide and pretty much as wide as they'll go. And then we come forward and down. Now, if there's a lot of pain or something, you might need to adjust the legs, but hopefully there isn't. And again, we're stretching in here. The difference is when we had our feet together, that was stretching the shorter adductors closer to the pubic bones, so pectineus and brevis. Now that we have the legs straight, at least in theory, we're getting more of the long adductors like gracilis and magnus and longus. So the I think it's adductor magnus is the dividing line between the hamstrings and the adductors. So it might feel like a hamstring stretch or very similar to that, and that's to be expected because, again, depending on how you look at it, some people would even count magnus as a hamstring and adductor. It's called adductor magnus, so obviously it's an adductor. Whether or not you call it a hamstring or not probably just depends on your education, your experience, things like that. This brings up a good point that I like to make every now and then, which is you might think like we know everything there is to know about the human body, but we don't. You might think that all scientists or anatomists agree, but they don't. So it's good to keep this in mind because in my profession, I think, there can be a fair amount of wishy-washiness. There can be, sometimes it might sound like, well, this person said this and this other person said that. And, because yoga isn't necessarily science-based, we might think, well, it's a bunch of bullshit. People are just making stuff up. But what you'll find is if you know enough about science, if you know enough about medicine, if you know enough about really any field, if you dive deep enough, you find people disagree. Experts disagree. People who spend their entire life in that field disagree. So pick your field. Historians, sociology, anthropology, biology, physics. You will find people who are immersed in that field and they disagree. So again, my yin teacher who taught me anatomy, he would not count adductors as a adductor magnus as a hamstring. For him, it's an adductor. And again, it's right there in the name, adductor magnus. But my massage therapist, who is really good, and I really admire him. He knows a lot. He's constantly learning. He's great. He calls adductor magnus a hamstring. So again, it's just something that I like you to be aware of because you might take a class and the teacher says something that's different from what I say. It doesn't necessarily mean one of us is wrong. We could both be right depending on the perspective and the context in which we're speaking. And also, one of us could be wrong. Sometimes that's the case too. So I'm not saying that everybody is right. When there's a disagreement, there's, I guess, three possible scenarios. A is wrong and B is right, or B is wrong and A is right, or both are wrong or both are right. And again, both could be wrong. So even with people who are experts. And so this is worth keeping in mind when you're dealing with professionals like doctors, people who it seems like you can't question what they say. It seems like their education has made them foolproof. but that's just not the case. It's not the case in yoga. It's not the case in medicine. It's not the case in science. Um, so it's just good to keep that in mind, that even someone who is really, really expert, and my massage therapist definitely is, him and I are going to name that or think about that muscle slightly differently. We actually are pretty much in agreement, just kind of the way we might categorize it is a little different. Okay, let's unwind onto the back. Take your time doing that. We'll counter stretch in a moment as usual, but let's just take a break. Okay, we'll bring those legs in, give them a nice squeeze, and shake it off with a little bit of gentle movement. And let's hinge up. And we'll explore our next posture. So speaking of hamstrings, this is a classic standard hamstring stretch. So right leg is straight, left foot to the inside of the thigh. Again, we call this the half butterfly. And we want to feel it back here. All right, let's switch sides here. So left leg is straight, right foot the inside of the thigh. Now you'll notice, I don't know if you noticed or not, but I changed position, and I'll explain that in a moment. So we're just coming forward and down, and again we want to feel the stretch in the back of the left thigh. So I ended up doing this, taking this leg, which was the bent leg, and bringing it around like so. This is called a half frog. Now, why did I do that? Well, our bodies change as we practice, and my body has definitely been changing lately. I've been working with my massage therapist a lot. I also started doing more of resistance training, walking less, a little less. I used to walk a lot more, a ridiculous amount. So I've sort of redistributed what I'm doing in terms of my practices and how I spend my time moving. I'm not saying I'm done. I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's just, you know, if you're concerned about these things, you're concerned about your health, you're concerned about optimal well-being, then you will likely do that from time to time because, again, your body will change, circumstances will change, your stress levels will change, your diet will change, the type of work you're doing, how long you work, you know, all kinds of things will change as you go through your life. And so for me, that half butterfly just wasn't really feeling effective, at least today. Maybe tomorrow it would be. But again, I'm looking for a stretch here. So again, this is called the half frog, and it allows me to get that stretch, whereas the half butterfly, I just wasn't really feeling it. Okay, so again, this is what I mean when I say, please let me know if you're having trouble with a pose. At the beginning of class, I say, let me know if you have any questions. So none of you ever do, but this is the type of thing. I know to do this because I've been trained, but you may not know how to modify the posture in a way that will give you a safe and satisfying stretch. So usually the way I teach is I'll give you one, maybe two options, but there might be a dozen options. I'm just not going to list them all because I would spend the whole class just listing options. You could do this, you could do that, you could do this, you could do that. So a much more efficient and a better way of dealing with that issue is one or two options, and then if that doesn't work, and I'll just repeat it now because I maybe have not said it in a while, not working means generally three things. One, I don't feel the stretch, and that's what was the case with me. I didn't feel it, so I needed to go further. The second thing that could happen is I feel it, but I also feel like I'm hurting myself. This doesn't feel safe. This feels dangerous for whatever reason. Third option is, yeah, I feel it. I feel safe, but I'm so miserable. I'm just going to have to come out of this in a minute or two. I'm going to have to readjust. I'm going to have to keep shifting around. So at least in yin yoga, those are three things, three conditions that we want to meet when we're doing the postures. I think you all know that, but there's one thing I've learned teaching for many, many years is not everyone hears you. And even if they hear you, they don't always actually hear what was said. It sort of goes in one ear and out the other. And they might even be able to repeat what you said, but it doesn't really register. So one of the things that my teachers emphasize, several of them, is repetition, repetition, repetition. So if you take this class regularly, you've probably heard most of what I have to say about most of this stuff, but you will continue to hear me say it because it's not because I don't have anything else to say or, I don't know I'm saying the same thing. It is a very intentional thing on my part, and any good teacher generally will do that. Let's go ahead and come on up and we'll come back onto our back and we will rebound. Okay, we're bringing those legs in, make a few circles in each direction. And then once again, we'll hinge up to seated. Okay, so now we'd like to target the glutes here. So I'm going to give you 3 choices here. It's really 2, but it might feel like 3 to you because one is just a variation of the other. First option, just sit cross-legged, fold forward, and do you feel the stretch? Do you feel safe? Do you feel like you can hold it? Okay, so right in here, the glutes. So if it's, yep, I feel safe, I feel the stretch, I can hold it, perfect. It doesn't matter that it's a very simple position, okay? Next option, if I'm not really feeling the stretch, then I can bring the right foot over the left knee. Okay, and then same idea, I come forward and I want to feel it. Same area, glutes, okay? Final option, if you're feeling a pinching here instead of a stretch here, then you can try this, which is a shoelace, okay? So all of them are targeting the glutes. And again, you're going to just determine for yourself which one feels appropriate. They may all work. So that's possible too. So in which case you can just choose the one that seems to be addressing what you're feeling today, what most effectively is addressing that, okay? right, we'll come on up. You'll notice again, I switched up what I was doing because I wasn't really feeling the proper stretch in that last shape. Okay, so again, something I'm hoping that you are doing or will do. The body changes. It might be the same for a very, 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 very long time, even decades, depending on what's going on with you. But if you live long enough, the body does change. And I think if you were doing yoga from a very young age, then you'd probably be quite aware of this, because probably when you hit puberty, you would notice changes in your body. Certain postures that felt good, that were effective, that were safe, might have no longer been that way anymore. And then you might have found poses that you couldn't do, that were difficult or impossible. All of a sudden, you might have been able to start doing them. And that's why it's really important to remember, and again, I try and remind everybody of this on a regular basis, is it's tricky because it's not about how many poses we can do or how perfect they are. It's different than other activities where maybe we can measure just by, okay, how many poses did you do? How long did you do them? How often can you do them? You know, how deep did you go? Some people try and do yoga in that way, and I think that's a huge mistake, because it distracts us from really the benefit that we can get from yoga. So it doesn't really matter what posture you're doing. You want to just do the best that you can. And that's going to be different in different contexts. So in yin, we want an effective, safe stretch that we can hold for 5 minutes. So there might be one shape that does that. There might be 3 or 5 that all meet that criteria. In flow, where we're making more of it's a yang mindset, we are making more of an effort, then it can be a little different, where if we're doing something like an arm balance, maybe you can't do the arm balance, but then the question becomes, well, what can I do? How much can I do? And I try as best as I can to break down the postures in that way. So they're little bite-sized chunks, and at a certain point, you might have your mouth full, metaphorically speaking, where you can't take another bite. And that's perfect, okay? That's what's so hard to communicate, is so many people will think, well, I can't do what he's doing, so forget it. And then they just sit down and take a sip of water. And, you know, if you do that, it's not the end of the world. But what I'm trying to encourage you to do is, a lot of times at the hardest part of the class, during the hardest pose, that's not a great time to take a break, because there's so much benefit that comes from just making the effort and breathing with that discomfort, breathing with the effort that you're making. Right? It's much better to take a sip of water when we're, laying down, or when we're taking a little break, when we're rebounding or something like that. But what I see in classes is a lot of times the opposite. It's when the person feels that they can't do the full pose, it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, they'll come out of it, they take a sip of water, or they just watch someone else. And it's very difficult to communicate the value in that, because we're so used to this, again, achievement-oriented model that most of us are focused on. But when it comes to the benefits we get from yoga, You don't have to do the full pose. You don't have to go the deepest. You don't have to look the prettiest to get the most benefit out of it. So ironically, sometimes the person who looks the worst and who is, from a performative aspect, doing the worst is actually getting the most benefit. Okay, so I hope you all understand. So just unwind onto your back. The benefit we're getting and how well we're performing the pose are separate from one another. They're separate. So I can be doing a really bad version of a pose or a practice, and if I'm approaching it in the right way, I can be getting more benefit than the person who seems to be doing it perfectly. Because I'll tell you, chances are if someone's doing it perfectly, they're probably not getting that much benefit from it. The benefit that they got from that is probably in the past. The fact that they can do it so easily probably means that there's not that much benefit left in it. Okay, I know that might be hard to understand or comprehend, but a lot of the benefit in these things is in the journey. It's not in the destination. So when I can do a perfect XYZ pose, probably I've milked a lot of the benefit out of that, and I should maybe start focusing on something else. All right, bring your legs in, give them a little squeeze, shake it out. I hope that makes sense to all of you, because this is a very hard concept to articulate to people, because again, we are raised with grades and assessments and positive feedback. Oh, you're doing such a good job. Oh, look at that. All this, and so we're used to looking at these metrics, whereas the metrics for yoga are really inside of us. It's not something you can see, and that can be hard to articulate to people. Okay, so half saddle. Bring the right foot back. We don't want to hurt the foot, the ankle, or the knee. Okay, so pad the foot if it needs it. The foot can point back, it can point out to the side. The knee can point straight ahead or out to the side. Okay, you can sit up on something, and what you're looking for is a stretch right here. Those are your quads. If you feel it, great, just stay right there. If you don't, though, begin to lower back and see if you can find a stretch. You may have to come all the way back. Just depends on, again, what's going on in your body. Okay, let's switch sides. Most people will need to come up to switch sides. I happen to have hips and enough flexibility to not need to do that, but please don't assume that you need to do the same. Okay, so feel free to come up, put your leg in position, make sure everything is safe, and then you can come back into the pose as you're ready. All right. So take your time. Make your way onto your back. Just relax.